hey everybody, we've got a great panel for you. We do recognize we're sort of running short of time, so we're going to get cooking right here quick. So I am, if you didn't hear me earlier, my name is Adele Morris. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I work on climate and energy economics. And by the way, I forgot to say it this morning, but the stuff I was talking about is going to come out in a paper. Like, I was trying so hard to get it done today, and my dog ate my homework. So it's going to be out in the next few days. So all the kind of stuff I was talking about will be in that paper, and go to brookings.edu, and you can find it there. So I'm going to go straight to discussing our next panel, and I'm delighted to welcome Gene Trisko, who's here. He's been a long-time advocate for the interests of mine workers. And he's going to be followed by Jeff Whitehead, who you met earlier, and Chuck Fluharty, who's been, I guess, he's kind of, I don't know, the godfather of understanding rural policy making. So we've got a terrific lineup. So Gene, take it away.
Thank you, Adele. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back here. This is a wonderful program. I look forward to continued discussion about these really critical issues for this part of the country. I have a relatively brief presentation. I'll give you a very short bio. Back in the day, I was in law school. I had a difficult time deciding between environmental law and labor law. I had a great environmental law professor, Rogers, who wrote the Horn Book. And so out of law school, I decided to kind of split the difference and practice environmental law on behalf of labor unions. And my first labor client was Rich Trumka of the United Mine Workers. And I represented Mr. Trumka in his negotiations known as the Mitchell-Trumka Compromise on acid rain for a period of nearly 10 years. And I currently represent and have for many, many years President Cecil Roberts of the United Mine Workers. And the issues I'd like to touch on today, first, and you've gotten a lot of details this morning, the magnitude of the challenge that we are confronting in coal-related communities, the need for support for UMWA healthcare and retirement funds. Sam Petzont, my old friend from Senator Byrd's staff, has succinctly described the crisis in the 1974 fund. What do these funds mean to the West Virginia economy? What have we contributed? What are we contributing? What would happen if we're not around in the future? And a point about the need for private investment to supplement government support. We're going to need a combination of both in order to get through this. You've seen slides similar to this earlier today. Merely stands for the proposition that West Virginia, Appalachian states, and Midwest have the largest emission reduction requirements under the Clean Power Plan. This chart kind of would stand for a graphic of a future carbon market trading program in terms of the level of allowance allocations. EPA projects that coal generation will be reduced by 50% from 2012 historic levels by 2030. A 50% reduction in any baseload generating capacity resource is unprecedented in this nation. And it will be a challenge for us finding the appropriate mix of alternative generation resources to maintain grid reliability and particularly stability. Grid stability and voltage stability are emerging as critical issues. In fact, they are why in the Department of Energy's long-term energy forecast for the United States, they maintain a level of about 200 gigawatts of coal baseload capacity out to the year 2050 in their base case forecast. And the reason for that is grid stability. Grid stability, because as we know, renewable resources are intermittent in nature, while baseload is 24/7. The implications for Appalachian coal production, according to EPA, are a 72% reduction from 2009 levels by the year 2025. Now, a lot of those adverse impacts are going to be concentrated in central Appalachia. This is not central Appalachia. We are in northern Appalachia. We are sitting, literally, we are meeting today on top of the Pittsburgh coal seam, which is a quite different seam relative to the much thinner seams that exist in southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. And the economics of mining production in this part of Appalachia are very different from those in the south. Generally, they're more favorable here. They're lower cost because they're predominantly longwall mining. So you would expect to see of this huge 72% decline, you would expect to see the largest concentration of those losses in central Appalachia due to its production economics. I wanted to share with you the findings of a study by the Economic Policy Institute. Now, EPI is a friend of ours, a friend of labor's generally. They do good work. And they looked at EPA's Clean Power Plan and the job impacts in a more comprehensive and incisive way than EPA had done in its regulatory impact analysis. They wanted to find out where the jobs would be lost, what industries, and this goes beyond coal. It goes into all of the industries that are energy intensive, that are affected by increases in power prices, and where those industries are located, what states they're located in. And then they went into the degree of unionization. And it turns out this is 4 bullets on the EPI study. This is the takeaway. The power plant will cost tens of thousands of jobs in the utility, mining, and energy intensive industry sectors, and that includes steel, chemicals, aluminum, rubber, so on and so forth. The rule does have a net positive job impact because the net positive jobs result from the large number of employment increases in energy efficiency and in renewables. But it turns out that while there is this net positive job impact, the industries with job losses tend to be higher waged, skilled, and from our standpoint, most importantly, unionized industries. Coal, in fact, the entire coal supply chain, from coal mining, coal transportation, the railroads. There's 7 unions involved in railroad transportation. The railroads, and then finally to the power plants, is one of the most heavily unionized sectors in the U.S. economy. So when you dramatically change that source of supply, you're going to impact the degree of unionization. And so the study bears out that the winners, so to speak, those states and industries experiencing job increases, tend to be lower wage, less skilled, and non-union. This slide I prepared for the benefit of the back row. Now, this is a very straightforward. If you go back in the day of WVU, you would know Bill Miernick of the Regional Research Institute, who was one of the pioneers of input-output, regional input-output analyses. Well, this is the U.S. Department of Commerce's economic multipliers for all of the states. There are about 15 of them. That produced more than 1 million tons of coal a year, and use the Department of Commerce tables, input-output tables, state by state, for these 15 states, and it will tell you how much state economic output, household income, and direct and indirect jobs are associated with coal mining. So the aggregate number, and this is coal overall, the aggregate numbers are $68 billion state output, $17 billion in household income, and 335,000 direct and indirect U.S. jobs. Now, if you look at the West Virginia numbers, and this is the challenge to the back row, if you assume that West Virginia loses 1/2 of its coal production, now remember the Appalachian number was 72%. Let's assume West Virginia is 50%. if West Virginia were to lose 1/2 of its coal production, state output equivalent to GDP would be reduced by about $8 billion a year. That would be a reduction of about 11% for the state's GDP. Corresponding impact on state revenues, ceteris paribus. Household incomes would decline by about $2 billion a year, and 37,000 jobs would be lost. Now, how does that translate to average households in West Virginia? West Virginia is not leading the pack when it comes to median household incomes. In fact, it's well below the U.S. median. $1.8 billion in lost household incomes would equate to an average loss of $2,449 per household. That in turn would represent a 5% loss of income on average for households with an average pre-tax income of $54,877. The U.S. average is about $61,000. However, for the 58% of West Virginia households with pre-tax incomes of less than $50,000 a year, and that 58%, by the way, compares with a national average of 49% for this particular metric. For those households, a $2,400 annual loss of household income would equate to a 10% loss of household incomes. UMWA is contributing to the socioeconomic benefits of the West Virginia economy through our health and retirement funds. We have more than 100,000 retirees and their dependents, their families, surviving spouses, who receive health care or pensions from the health and retirement funds. In the year 2014, a total of $1.1 billion went into coalfield communities from the funds, supporting pension payments and direct payments to health care providers for retiree health care benefits. That included about $400 million going into rural West Virginia communities. The UMWA funds essentially support the medical community in southern West Virginia. And these numbers, our contribution, these are our contributions, do not include what the coal companies, the employers pay, which is equivalent or greater. So our continuing question is, what are the specifics of a just transition plan that would continue providing these already earned benefits if the coal industry is shut down and the contributions from the companies stop? This graphic simply gives you proportion for the states receiving the largest benefits from our health and retirement funds in 2014. West Virginia is the largest, followed by Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Illinois, Virginia, and Alabama, basically the Appalachian family. Unfortunately, last year, our efforts to enact legislation in the United States Congress in order to shore up our health and retirement funds failed by one vote. And we are hopeful, we are optimistic. No, ladies and gentlemen, we are confident. We are confident that this one vote issue will be resolved and that there will be appropriate support in Congress for solving our health and retirement fund problem. A word about private investment capital. I did what I'll call a back-of-the-envelope calculation on the value of replacing, the investment cost of replacing the mining and generation assets that are being lost, or they're projected to be lost. And I'm going to take 100 gigawatts of reduced capacity, generating capacity, and that would be in the Appalachian region, based upon EPA's projection of lost coal capacity. 100 gigawatts of coal capacity and about 175 million tons of annual coal capacity, mining production capacity. I used two different generations for these investments. The power plants themselves are older. They're built between the 60s and 70s. The mines are somewhat newer. I used an average of 1980. And I looked up the investment cost. What did it take to build a coal mine in the 1980s? What did it take to build a coal-based generation plant in the 60s and 70s? Well, back then it was about $200 per kilowatt of capacity. Today it's over $2,000 for a conventional coal plant before you add CCS. We're not sure what it would be with CCS, but it would be a good deal above $2,000. I then said, I'm not going to make any assumptions regarding real cost increases associated with mining due to reserve depletion or real cost increases in power generation due to, for example, increased environmental requirements, CCS requirements, what have you. I'm not going to make any assumptions about that because there are no facts about the future. I'll simply say, what happened to the consumer price index from the time those mines and plants were built in the 60s and 70s and today? And the answer is that the original investment of this energy supply capacity, which I estimated about $25 billion at the times that the mines and the power plants were built, to replicate those facilities today would cost on the order of $140 billion a year. And that is an investment challenge that has to be considered alongside and an integral component of any long-term plan for regaining the jobs that are being lost in the energy supply sector at a level of comparable wages. Now, you could do a similar set of calculations and say, well, what's the investment if we were to translate it into Procter & Gamble manufacturing plants, into General Motors automobile plants, what have you? You will come out with approximately a number similar to this. It will be in excess of $100 billion. So that is the private investment challenge that we are confronted with. The gentleman on the left, of course, you will recognize as President Harry S. Truman. The gentleman on the right is our esteemed leader, the late John L. Lewis. The gentleman in the middle, Harold Ickes, the longest-serving Secretary of the Interior, whose son served as Bill Clinton's Chief of Staff. These gentlemen were about the hard work in 1947 of signing the Coal Act, which assured the integrity of UMWA's health and retirement funds. It was well appreciated then that our union saved this industrial economy in World War II, and that the day would not come when that debt would ever be forgotten. Thank you.
That last comment and slide's kind of hard to follow. Appreciate that. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today from Eastern Kentucky. We share so much in common with you in the coal fields where I'm from and serve 23 counties. So much of the conversation today has been kind of at the macro level and looking at these horrific numbers and what do we do from here. I'm going to kind of ratchet it down a little notch because I don't have all that data in front of me, and that's not where I'm coming from. I run a workforce agency that serves 23 counties, and a couple of years ago, we started bleeding jobs left and right. And they were our our families. They were the people, they were our neighbors, they're our brothers, our sisters, and our people that we go to church with. And so we're kind of faced with, what do we do? We got a $5.3 million national emergency grant from the Department of Labor. And there we stood with a pocket full of money, looking around at all of these jobs that had lost and looking in the faces of these miners who were looking at us and saying, listen, I don't have time to go to school for 2 years. I don't have time to be retrained. I just need to go to work. I got to take care of my family. I got a mortgage and those kinds of things. So there we stood. That's kind of where we were. And we started looking around and saying, well, you know, how do we spend this money wisely? And do we just put people in training for jobs that don't exist here? Do we put them in training that where maybe they can compete for half the wages if they can sell their house and move away? It was a struggle. You kind of get the picture. It's a daunting kind of situation. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what's worked so far. And I love Senator Rockefeller's statement that let's don't be grim about this. Let's be positive and hopeful. And I think that's what we're doing. We decided to put on our best face, and if we're going to go down, we're going to go down swinging. And we're going to go down doing everything that we can. Here's what this new narrative kind of meant for us, looking in this situation. The new narrative was that the old narrative is that Eastern Kentucky, like parts of West Virginia, is this isolated, barrier-ridden place where economic development is just really, really hard. We're not going to have much coming in. That's just the facts of the matter. The new narrative that we chose to embrace was that this is a new day, it's a new time. We're not 20 years ago. We're not pre-internet. We're not pre-technology. That because of the technological changes and because of the connectivity that we have, our mountains and our rural area are no longer barriers, they're an attraction. And that we could be the next best investment in America. And that we could train our people to compete in that global economy and in that wider marketplace if we just kind of start approaching things as if we're not this isolated group of people that just need to have somebody come in and save us. But how do we start competing for and providing services and solutions to the industries around us and beyond us? And that's kind of the approach we've taken. And that's the road that has led us down is we started not just going to chambers of commerce and talking to businesses within our 23 counties, which we did a lot of. We started going to Lexington and talking about our workforce and what was available. We went to Western Kentucky. We went over into Huntington. And we started receiving calls from different places. We went to chambers, and so that's resulted in, we've had like 20 job fairs in the last couple of years. We've had 8,000 participants come to those job fairs. We've had 275 employers attend, many of them not from our region. We've had people that we've put into work at Toyota in Lexington. We've helped relocate families after they found a job. We've had some wonderful coordinated efforts with industry from around that have kind of come together and put together some training for us so that people could compete. We've gotten some people jobs where you know, it's not the greatest thing. It's good paying work, but they'll go and maybe be gone for 4 days, and then they come back home. We've put over, I think there's been a 40 or 50 with a company called J.R. Corman, which is a short rail, doing a lot of maintenance work, and they actually come get our guys and take them to work and then deploy them and bring them back home. Like I said, we've had folks working in Toyota. So that's been a big part of our effort, is just that narrative that we're not isolated. How can we be a solution to other folks? We started with that $5.3 million. What we told the Department of Labor is that we thought we could serve 695 people with that. They thought that was a good number. We've spent, since that time now, we've spent $11.8 million, but we've served 3,050 people, and we put 1,500 of them back to work. Some relocating, some in those jobs that I've described, and some locally. So we think that new narrative and that approach is working somewhat. It's a part of the solution. It's not for sure the only one, and everything that we've been talking about today is so important, this big investments into our region. We're a part of a tech hire community as a result of this. We're the only rural tech hire community in the nation. National Economic Council, back a couple of years ago, identified 20 or so areas, and we were chosen as one of those. And we've been working feverishly to develop an they told us we could do it. So, you know, it's not like we're in Chicago where there's a whole bunch of IT jobs available. And all we had to do is fast track people into training and then put them in those jobs. We had to kind of develop we're trying to develop the ecosystem as we go. And that was earlier today. That's a BitSource. But we're connecting with, I think we're doing a smart thing. We're connecting with some IT software companies around the state. In Louisville, we have a company that is a Google contractor, an award-winning software company, an upstart. But they bring to us the credibility of people who are doing Silicon Valley work, who are working on Google Glass, who's working with Kindred Healthcare Systems, who are developing product that they're selling. So how do we're connecting with them, and folks like Full Stack Academy out of New York, to bring the best training, the best curriculum into the mountains to support BitSource, to expand Interact into the mountains and begin an ecosystem. Our dream is to have a couple spin-offs. We believe that there's plenty of rural proofs around the country. It's kind of the economic growth potential that's going on today that a lot of people don't realize, is that we are insourcing a whole lot of IT jobs that we have been outsourcing. And a lot of that insourcing is happening in rural America or in smaller towns. So we think because of technology, and as we can train our folks to compete for those jobs are jobs that can be done remotely. We don't have to have a big brick and mortar company come in. We'd like them, and we think that'll attract them, but we can start developing the talent as we then can market folks, or market to those bigger companies. We started a few years ago with the notion that the way people work is so much different today. People work remotely, right? Many of you, I'm sure, get up in the morning and do some work. On weekends, you do some work. Some of my most productive times is away from the office where I can just be at home and work. That's happening all the time. And so we've started off kind of going for the low-hanging fruit and looking for at the workforce that we have, not super skilled, but that's working. In one county last year, a little county called Jackson County, Kentucky, population maybe 7,000 something, 8,000 people. They happen to be one of those rural telephone cooperative places. So they're really well connected in this little poor county. They're a gigabit county, if you can believe that. People like, you know, big cities are trying to become a gigabit city. That's what they're aspiring to be. Well, we got a little gigabit county. But the interesting thing about that is we put 230 people to work in that county last year, working for companies that aren't in Jackson County. They're not even in Kentucky. We got people working for U-Haul, for banks, for a lot of retail, a lot of hotel kind of things, Apple. And we've had some instances where people have gained skill and started getting better jobs and better wages. Just this week, I've talked with 4 or 5 tech companies that have remote work opportunities, little lower skills, but higher paying jobs in tech support. So the idea is, how do we train our people to compete for those jobs? These are some of the things that we're pretty proud of, that we feel like we're making the best of it, and that we are doing what we can. We're not just going to sit around and train people for jobs that don't exist. We're going to try to compete in that global marketplace. So I'm trying to move quickly for sake of time. We're talking, you know, there's a $500,000 workforce shortage in CNC operators. Did you know that? Because we have, over the years, been outsourcing that. And when the Great Recession hit, a lot of our manufacturers and folks got caught with no product because all these other countries were struggling too. Parts weren't coming in. So there's a real effort to try to build that CNC workforce. And we're working with them, and we're talking with companies like that. So the question, I guess what we're trying to say at the end of the day, as a region and as a little workforce agency working with folks, we're trying to say, what can we do for industry in America? What can we do for industry globally? Not what industry can do for us. It's kind of an adaptation to the wisdom of President Kennedy back in the day. So that we don't turn inward, we look outward, and we try to be the best solutions that we can. We believe we have the workforce for it, and we believe that we have the right kind of, I guess, urgency within our population right now. We're tough. We're a tough people. West Virginians are tough. We're resilient. And really, a lot of the things that you have to learn is just sticking with it just long enough when other people would quit to get it and then move forward. So that's what we're doing in the stark reality that we found ourselves in. And I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you. And I just want to say to those of people like Adele and others that are looking at policy issues like this, I'm so appreciative. And I want all these folks to know that you have a good partner in West Virginia and in Eastern Kentucky, because we're doing our part, and it's worth the investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just say, first of all, what an honor it is to serve on a panel with Gene and my friend Jeff. I have great respect for both of them, and the regions they work in are blessed to have them. First of all, I want to thank President Gee and the Provost and Dean Bowman and Senator Rockefeller and Rocky particularly for starting this discussion. Jamie, it's great to be back with you again. We've come a long way in 2 years. I'm going to take advantage of Senator Rockefeller's wisdom and say we're going to gain some perspective right now. If I go through my whole presentation, you're going to be way over, and I know you're waiting on the last presentation. So I'm going to just try to cover a couple of things and maybe offer some advice to the state of my birth based upon what Kentucky did. These two gentlemen mean a great deal to me, very strong public servants, the poster child for the right and the left. Senator Steve Beshear, who was the poster child for ACA, and 5th District Congressman Hal Rogers, the Republican House Appropriation Chair. Their staffs came to me late in the summer of 2013 with a challenge. They'd been directed to me by Secretary Vilsack, and they said, we've got to do something in eastern Kentucky. We're hemorrhaging jobs. Can we fix that? My answer was, of course you can. It will take somewhere around 2.5 generations, and I'll be glad to start with you. I won't be there at the end. And then they said, no, we got to do something right away. And I think they were in the place then that maybe West Virginia is right now. And what we found in economic development work, until it gets bad enough, the 5 stages of Kubler-Ross's grief that regions go through haven't kicked in yet. When you get to acceptance that coal is not coming back, then you're ready to do something. And they asked me what I would recommend, and I said, you have a psychosocial problem in the region, you do not have an economic problem. Every region that's had a natural resource curse has a challenge with dependence in intergenerational transfer of hope around that industry. And until you break that culturally, that cultural mandate is seated in a young man or woman sitting in the 1st grade, and you'll never change it. But if you want to change it, I believe we have the time to do it right now. They thought I was crazy, of course, but eventually they came back to me and they said, what would you do? I said, I would suggest we do a regional summit. I would suggest we talk about 3 things: what hope looks like, what innovations are out there and are working, what ideas do you have to move beyond coal, and our covenant with one another would be, we will not talk about coal. Coal will stay. Coal will remain good in many ways, but we have to diversify. They agreed to do it in spite of the fact that the war on coal ideologues continued to be in that region. On the 23rd of October in 2014, 35 regional leaders from those 60 counties, one of whom was Jeff, who we really appreciate, gathered and agreed they would hold that summit. 2 weeks later, it was up to 55. And what was occurring was the leaders in those 60 counties were saying, I'm going to sign up for this. This has gravitas. If these 2 guys will do it, we'll get behind it. I forced them to give me 1 day for the summit. They wanted to have a 2-hour meeting, of course. But we've done this all over the world. And when you give people an unmediated hope, separate from the political establishment, if they care about their place, they're going to own it and they're going to go with it. And they did. Started to get registrations, 100, 200. We moved from the high school to the Knights of Columbus, 400, 500. December 9th, rose in the mountains, snow, rain, a lot of accidents. 1,700 citizens of eastern Kentucky drove to the regional university gymnasium in Pikeville. The most humbling experience of my professional public service life. We asked folks, just give us your ideas. Do you have an innovation? Do you have a plan? Do you have a concern? We had idea kiosks around the entire arena. 1,290 detailed ideas for what the region might do. As we read them, it made you cry. No one had given those people the freedom to talk about where they wanted to move together. We published every one of those in detail as a report to the state. Immediately, we had an agenda and a purpose and a direction. At that summit, I said this to the audience. Kentucky has 5 unique challenges. I think West Virginia has the same 5. County lines, family names, Friday night lights, listening to old tapes, and the stories we tell ourselves. Till we change the narrative, we remain the same. We went through 2014 and did an awful lot. If you want to look at the history of this organization, please let me know. It's an amazing history, because what occurred was 25 regional leaders like Jeff agreed to form a working committee of 25 to 40 people, and they did roundtables in those 60 counties. 1,500 additional citizens sat through those roundtables. And at the end of that summer, when the second summit came, we had a set of priorities from the leaders in that region that then created a 501c3 standalone intermediary, which worked. Here is what was different. SOAR articulated the state's social contract new. And what it basically said was, you have a cadence in the triage you have to work through. The first is you have triage demands of workers, families, and firms. But once that is done, you have an intermediate need for communities and regions to unite, and long-term, you have a social contract with emerging generations 5 generations out. And what we demanded was, you know, you can never tell where really good ideas come from in a speech. That may have been one. The key thing, if you know about collective impact investing, the whole goal of SOAR was to change nothing that anyone else was doing, but collect the synapses, align them, and try to add value to the work of others. An awful lot happened. We got a promise zone. We got a strike force. We got a race to the top district. We now have broadband going in all over eastern Kentucky. But those weren't the big things. The big things were the new alignments. The big things were cross-sector understandings. The big things were people were talking to each other one county over who never had talked to each other about their food system or their entrepreneurship program or the wraparound services in the school or what they do in the churches to support food for folks less fortunate than they. This is the vision that we work on in RUPRI. When we talk about rural wealth, we all too often think about financial. There are 8 forms of rural wealth, and in the next generations that come, I want to argue, as Jeff suggested and as others did about our artisan future, the real keys for the future I do not think are financial. I think they are the other gifts that we bring to an urban America that needs everything we have to sustain their livelihood. The challenge with this is wealth is only built if you add to one of those by not detracting from another. And that is a hard thing to do. But the key thing in RUPRI's vision is this framework. And the key thing to that framework is new narratives and new networks. We sincerely believe that collective impact is the way to do this. Let me just close with my perception of where you are, because I am a prophet and I get to leave. But I know rural America pretty well, and I know this state very well. You're really close to a tipping point. And what excites me about the Rockefeller Institute And what excites me about this discussion is, I personally believe this state needs to do, frankly, what Kentucky did. And that is to generate a dialogue on some backbone organization that everyone trusts that competes with none of the other organizations that are here, but just seeks to add some value to that voice. I would argue it is not going to come from your political establishment. We were very helpful to have Hal Rogers and Steve Beshear together, but I want to tell you folks, it damn near killed Fluharty. Because in every meeting they were on my ass and on my back and afterwards on the phone with me saying, what are those SOBs doing? It's the hardest work I ever had, and I still don't know if it's going to succeed. We're 2 years in, we're doing some good things, we've elected a new governor, but organically that region has changed. It's reflected in what Jeff talked about, but it's occurring in every sector. If you have a chance to Google one thing, Google KVEC, Kentucky Valley Educational Consortium. 18 school districts that got to the race to the top district. They are doing amazing things. 18 superintendents working together, wraparound school service, health in the schools, local and regional foods, innovation and IT. Jeff knows about them. That happened because that region says, let's do something about our schools. I think you're ready. I think you're close. I hope someone figures out how to do it. It's been great to be with you. Thanks so much.
Well, with that terrific set of presentations, I can't resist letting somebody ask a burning question, if you've got one, and give just a short time for discussion. Any questions? Am I? Oh, yes, sir.
Mr. Fluharty, I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. So there have been a few of us that have been thinking about how to have a store initiative, what to do. A lot of us want to do that. And so you sort of led us down a path of how to get started. I wonder if you have other advice. We want to get it going. We want to make sure the community, the community voices are at the top of that agenda, just how we facilitate that and just lay the groundwork in our political climate too, making sure we have the right people.
First of all, your first intuition is the right one. If the community voices are not there, this will not work. It's particularly the case when your political economy and your governance is fractured. So it's going to have to come from the dirt. We've done this all over the nation, the world. I'll say three things. If the next generation is not there, not in a token way, but in an actual leadership way, it will not be successful because that's why you're doing it. Secondly, think an awful lot about arts and culture and creative placemaking. If you've not gone to our website for ruralgeneration.org, take a look at that. The bottom line is this. We can do all the economic development we want, but at the end of the day, if the place where those resources exist is not a quality place, human resources and site selection professionals will not bring their middle managers there, and when millennials start having children, they will not go there. So we truly need to think about regional community placemaking. Great communities linking to regions. Why do we not have regional rural culture hubs? Why do we not unite human and natural resource ecosystems in some sort of a hub and spoke? I think all of that is very, very possible. The thing I would say is your most important question is, are we going to do any harm? And you need to be very clear that you're not doing harm when you start the journey. Because if you start the journey and it is an abortive effort, it'll be another generation before you get a chance to have that. You know how rural people are.
Well, please join me in thanking the panelists for this discussion.
Thank you. Great job.